We reviewed the project, and I was like, wow, well, this is going to be challenging, you know? It's quite a bit of beams, and, you know, what are we going to do at these intersections, and how is this going to work? And we kind of had to figure out how to build this beast and how to make those junctions. Typically with beam jobs, you don't have intersecting beams. So this one was when I first looked at it, my first instinct was like, wow, this is going to be an interesting job.
My first thoughts were that, you know, it was very large in scale, and I didn't know exactly how I was going to be able to draw this or how we were going to be able to even manufacture it. It was just kind of like a big question mark in the beginning, and then that's why we had quite a few initial meetings, you know, with everyone that was going to be involved as far as drafting and the PM and manufacturing on how we were even going to do this.
I think initially I saw it, I was intrigued by the layout and the design, but I knew that it was something that we could do and handle internally, but it was going to take some effort and definitely group teamwork. There was some considerations early on as to the sheer size of the wood beams, the intricacy of the layout, and how we were going to handle making the wood beams, cutting the miters on them, fastening them, suspending them, all of those things came up early on.
Probably the most challenging part of this is like, how are we going to cut this? How are we going to make these big beams and small beams and cut them and make all these angles? Yeah, I knew there was going to be a lot of parts. Like a lot of parts. Like I knew none of them were going to be the same, but I had to figure out how to make it so that we had parts that were interchangeable that would work. There's only a few beams in this job that are actually about the same size. So it's kind of one of those organizational nightmares that you run across and you're like, I think we can do this though.
So the way we broke out the drawing was by cloud. There's 5 separate areas. So we just called them clouds A through E. But other than that, I think there was about 200 different links in this project.
Really the first steps involved us with the overhead plan layout and just sketching over the top of trying to figure out the connections, which beams were going to be the main support beams and which ones were going to be basically carried from those.
The idea was that we'd be able to send this whole project out to the field, and they'd be able to look at our shop drawings and say, hey, we're putting beam A here, beam B here, beam C here, and put this whole thing together like a big, like an instruction manual. Mark Stender and myself came up with a design for the 4-inch beams when they hit intersections to overlap to keep the faces aligned. So you'd actually hang it on both sides when you're putting it up, which gave the installer flexibility to slide it in either direction. It also gave them the ability to work a little bit ahead or work on parallel beams and then insert the perpendicular beams.
We knew that they weren't going to be able to field cut these on site, so they had to be exact measurements. And then we did actually create a new hardware piece where a beam would meet another beam perpendicularly. You would have that beam saddle to help keep everything in position. It was just the easiest thing to do to number the clouds A through E, and then every beam within the cloud would correspond to that number. So A would be, you know, A1 through A60 or however many beams were within that cloud. So there were a few repeating, but going back and looking at it, there were about 200 different beams throughout this project.
A lot of the labeling went from the drawings directly to being CNC'd in the parts themselves. So as they were being made, they were engraved with labels, and that correlated to the plans as to where they went. So we number all of our crates with packing slips so we know what pieces are in there. And ultimately it coordinated with Dave's installation drawing, which I believe he sends right to the customer directly.
felt really good. It was more of a relief than anything, to be honest with you, because you try so hard to make everything perfect and get there on time. And really, my job was to make sure all the material and everything was there when it was supposed to be.
I couldn't believe like how beautiful it looked, honestly. Like just taking something from drawing on a computer screen to just seeing it, in a video is pretty amazing. The amount of work that was put into this project from drafting all the way through PM and manufacturing was just immense. And, it took everyone to make this project really come out and come alive. And it just makes me feel really good. Like, hey, I drew that. I was involved with that.
For me, it was gratifying. Like I felt it was a win. There was a lot to do with this project, and to see that, and then to know that there were very little, if any, calls from the site with something like this, made me feel like the team did a really good job. It's what we do well, in my opinion.